Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable Mrs. Dr. Anissa Astrid ST MPD, the Honorable, all my friends from PBI2 and my friends from Group 6. For the first, let me introduce myself. My name is Bella Karista and my friends are Fitri Rahmasari, Lisa Febiana, and Nur Kholiza Eka Saputri. In this opportunity, we are going to discuss about 4 topics. Number 1 is the differences between objective and subjective tests. Number 2, the differences between reference to norms and reference to criteria in determining the interval scores for students. Number 3, the differences between aspect correctiveness and appropriacy in scoring the test. And number 4, the differences between artificial and authentic tests. Now let's move to the first topic. Number 1, the differences between objective and subjective tests. According to Pilliner in Bachman 1990, he pointed out an objective test as a test which has concrete, provable, and straightforward answer. An objective test can also be called as a test which has right or wrong answer. And then the example of objective tests are true or false, matching, multiple choices, and short answer. And then he pointed out a subjective test as a test which assessed by providing an opinion. The example of subjective tests are essay and open-ended answers based on reading comprehension. But subjective tests can also be in the form of multiple choices, but the test takers must make subjective decision about how best to answer the question. Okay, for more detail of information about the difference between objective and subjective tests, let's see the example of both of the tests. For the first objective test, now let's see the example number 1. The sun rises in the east. Everyone knows in the fact the sun rises in the east, so we have to choose true as the best answer. And then number 2, there are blank 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 months in a year. So the answer is C, because we know that in a year consists of 12 months. Number 3, the capital of Indonesia is, so we must choose Jakarta or B as the best answer. So we can conclude that there's only one correct answer in objective test. Thus, objective tests require far more careful preparation than subjective tests. In an objective test, the correctness of the test taker's answers are determined entirely by predetermined criteria, so that no judgments are required on the part of scorer, or scorer's personal taste cannot affect the scoring of the answers. Now let's see the example of subjective tests. Number 1, what is your opinion about the exam? Number 2, what can you conclude from the text? Number 3, please write an essay consist of 200 words about how important English language. So, we can conclude that in a subjective test, the answer may be various. Since the student gives the answer by giving opinion, so each student may have different answer to each other. And then, in a subjective test, the scorer must make a judgment about the correctness of the answers based on his or her subjective interpretation of the scoring criteria.
Okay, so next we have to continue our discuss, that is about the differences between reference to norm and reference to criteria in determining the interval scores for students. So the first thing that we have to understand, and the first thing that we have to know, even the assessment expert couldn't tell the difference between two of them, so I will tell you. Actually, the differences is only in the scores and only in the sum test that can provide both criterion reference result and non-reference result. So the first thing that we must know is the meaning of them. Okay, criterion reference tests compare a person's knowledge or a person's skills, a predetermined standard, learning goal, performance level, or other criterion of the students, of course. But norm reference test is measure compare a person knowledge or a person's skills of the norm group, and the composition of the norm group depends on the assessment of the student. So next, we go to the criterion reference test. Okay, in the previous slide, we have to know what is the meaning of them, but now, in criterion reference test, the performance of other students does not affect a student's scores. For example, it doesn't matter how many other people are in the line, or how tall they are, or how short they are, whether you are allowed to get on the right is determined solely by your height. Even if you are the tallest person in the line, if the top of your head doesn't reach the line on the height chart, so it means you cannot ride. That's the point. Okay, so it means knowing students' score for a criterion reference test will only tell you how the specific student compared in relation to the criterion. Okay. Next is norm reference test. Okay. In this reference test, may also be further narrowed by age, by English language, by the socioeconomic level, or race, ethnicity, or many other characteristics of the students. Depends on the problems. So it means knowing the student's percentile rank on a norm reference test, it will tell you how the specific student performs and compared to the performance of the norm group, but will not tell you whether the student met, exceeded, or fell short of proficiency or any other criterion. Okay.
Okay, now we are going to the next part that is about the differences between aspect of correctness and appropriacy in scoring the test. Before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Fitri Rahmasari, and the first is correctness. Correctness or accuracy is an important skill in language communication with the people. Correctness scores are easy to compute and appear to be psychologically convincing to those teachers who prefer an exact numerical score to impressionistic rating as a measure of the seriousness of a given usage error, and then progress in a usage improvement, and the last, readiness to pass into a higher level class. And for example, the teacher will give point for one question. Okay, the example, the teacher give the student a question that's about where do you live, and then maybe the teacher will give 5 points for the answer that according to the correct rules, such as the grammar, punctuation, and so on. Okay, next is appropriacy. Appropriacy means suitable words of the language. So if all words are suitable as a grammar system and use the correct sentences in a appropriate language, it makes us proper use of language. There are many words which should have appropriate manner. For example, when your teacher is explaining in front of the class, and then you didn't hear to your teacher, usually you will spontaneously to say what, but that is but that is inappropriate word. So you can change by saying, "Sorry, sir," or "Sorry, miss, I didn't hear you. Could you repeat that?" Okay, I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, let me introduce myself first. My name is Lisa Febiana and I will continue the explanation from this group 6. It is number 4. The differences, the differences between artificial and authentic test. Before that, I would like to explain to you about the definition and the purposes of this test. Artificial test is designing materials specially for pedagogical or testing purposes. And then for authentic test is using real life language to achieve real life purposes in real life situation and with real life participants. So artificial test is just written test for pedagogical and testing purposes, and for authentic test we can see, in other words, it is a practice test and using real life participant situation purposes and also the language. For example, we have so many examples for artificial and also the authentic test, and I would told you just several of them. For artificial test, the example of artificial test is multiple choice, true or false, gap filling, matching, and so on. And for authentic test, we have interviews, journals, discussions, observations, and so on. Okay, I think that's all from our group. We are so sorry if there were so many mistakes. And wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.